The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of Kansas when the first ships appeared. Sarah Martinez was checking the irrigation system on her family farm when she noticed the strange shimmer in the sky. At first, she thought it might be heat waves or maybe military aircraft from the nearby base. But as the objects grew larger and more distinct, her blood ran cold. Massive triangular vessels, each the size of a city block, descended through the clouds like dark angels of death. Their hulls gleamed with an otherworldly metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols pulsed along their surfaces in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ships moved with an unnatural silence, defying everything humans understood about physics and propulsion. Sarah dropped her wrench and ran toward the farmhouse, her boots kicking up dust as she sprinted across the field. Behind her, the alien vessels continued their slow descent, casting enormous shadows that turned the golden wheat fields into an ocean of darkness. She burst through the screen door, startling her grandfather, who was sitting at the kitchen table with his morning coffee. "Grandpa Joe, you need to see this," she gasped, pointing toward the window. Joseph Martinez had served 3 tours in Vietnam and seen more than his share of strange things, but nothing had prepared him for the sight that greeted him outside. The old soldier's weathered hands gripped the window sill as he watched the alien armada settle into position above the surrounding farmland. His military training kicked in immediately. "Get to the basement, Sarah. Now," he commanded, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "And bring the radio." Across the globe, similar scenes were playing out in every major population center. The aliens had arrived simultaneously over New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, and dozens of other cities. Their timing was perfect, catching humanity during the height of the morning rush hour when millions of people were exposed in the open. In the Pentagon, General Stone stood before a wall of monitors showing the alien fleet's positions around the world. Her staff worked frantically at their stations, trying to establish communication with the mysterious visitors while simultaneously preparing for the worst-case scenario. The general had spent 30 years in the military, rising through the ranks during conflicts in the Middle East and Eastern Europe. She had never backed down from a fight, and she wasn't about to start now. "Any response to our communication attempts?" she asked her communications officer. "Nothing, ma'am. We've tried every frequency, every protocol we know. They're either not receiving us or they're choosing to ignore us." General Stone nodded grimly. In her experience, when someone showed up unannounced with overwhelming force and refused to talk, they weren't there for a friendly chat. She turned to her aide, a young lieutenant with nervous eyes. "Get me the president on the line and activate the emergency broadcasting system. People need to know what's happening." The first attack came without warning. Beams of coherent energy lanced down from the alien ships, striking military installations, power plants, and communication centers with surgical precision. The weapons were unlike anything humanity had ever encountered, capable of melting through the thickest armor plating as if it were butter. Within minutes, most of the world's major military bases were smoking ruins. But the aliens had made a critical miscalculation. They had studied human technology and infrastructure, but they had failed to understand the human spirit. They expected panic, chaos, and quick surrender from a primitive species faced with superior firepower. Instead, they encountered something they hadn't anticipated: defiance. In a small town in Montana, Sheriff Jake watched the alien beam weapons reduce his police station to slag. Instead of running, he gathered his deputies and the local militia volunteers in the town's old bomb shelter, built during the Cold War. The concrete walls were 3 feet thick, and while they might not stop an alien energy weapon, they would provide some protection. "Listen up, everyone," Jake addressed the 30 men and women who had answered his call. "I don't know what these things want, but I know they just declared war on Earth. We might not have their fancy weapons, but we've got something they don't understand. We've got each other." The crowd murmured agreement, their faces grim but determined. These were people who had lived through economic hardship, natural disasters, and personal tragedies. They had learned to depend on themselves and their neighbors when times got tough. An alien invasion was just another challenge to overcome. Jake continued, "My grandfather fought the Nazis, my father fought in Korea, and I fought in Afghanistan. This family has never backed down from a fight, and we're not starting now. We're going to show these aliens what happens when you mess with humanity." Similar scenes were playing out across the planet. In the ruins of a destroyed Air Force base in Nevada, Colonel Hayes, the surviving personnel, Despite losing most of their aircraft to the initial attack, the colonel refused to surrender. He had served in Iraq, Syria, and the African conflicts, leading men and women through impossible odds. His battle-scarred face bore witness to years of combat, and his eyes held the steely determination that had kept him alive through countless firefights. "We may have lost our planes," he told his troops, "but we haven't lost our fight. These aliens think they can just show up here and take over our world. They're about to learn that humans don't go quietly into the night." The colonel's words spread through the underground bunker where the survivors had taken shelter. Pilots who had lost their aircraft grabbed rifles and joined infantry squads. Mechanics and engineers worked to salvage whatever weapons and equipment they could from the wreckage above. Everyone understood that this was no longer about following orders from distant commanders. This was about survival and the future of their species. Back in Kansas, the Martinez family had been joined by neighbors from surrounding farms. The basement of the old farmhouse had become an impromptu command center, with people sharing information gathered from battery-powered radios and cell phones that still worked. Grandpa Joe had retrieved his old service rifle from the gun safe, along with several hunting weapons and boxes of ammunition. "The way I see it," the old veteran explained to the gathered farmers, "these aliens made the same mistake the Japanese did at Pearl Harbor. They hit us hard, but they didn't finish the job. They wanted to shock us into submission, but all they've done is made us angry." Young Tom Harrison, a farmer from the next property over, nodded in agreement. "My great-grandfather fought in World War II. He always said that Americans fight hardest when their backs are against the wall." Sarah looked around the basement at the determined faces of her neighbors. These were people who had spent their lives coaxing crops from stubborn soil, battling droughts, floods, and economic uncertainty. They were survivors by nature, and they weren't about to give up their land to alien invaders without a fight. Outside, the alien ships had begun deploying ground forces. Strange creatures in powered armor descended from the vessels on beams of energy, their multiple limbs carrying weapons that glowed with malevolent energy. They moved with mechanical precision, sweeping through abandoned towns and cities, searching for human survivors. The aliens' strategy was sound in theory. Destroy the military infrastructure, eliminate communication networks, and then mop up the scattered human resistance with overwhelming technological superiority. It was a plan that had worked on dozens of other worlds, against dozens of other species. But Earth was different. In the mountains of Colorado, a group of survivalists led by former Army Ranger Captain David had established a resistance base in an abandoned mine shaft, had served multiple tours in Afghanistan, and had learned the hard lessons of asymmetric warfare. He understood that when faced with a superior enemy, you didn't fight them head-on. You made them pay for every inch of ground. "Gather around," addressed his fellow survivors, a mix of former military personnel, hunters, and ordinary citizens who had refused to abandon their homes. "These aliens think they can just walk in here and take over. They're about to discover that humans have been perfecting guerrilla warfare for centuries." The captain spread out a topographical map of the surrounding area on a makeshift table. "We know these mountains better than any alien ever could. We know every trail, every cave, every hiding spot. We're going to use that knowledge to make their lives hell." One of the younger survivors, a college student named Lisa Park, raised her hand. "But Captain, their weapons are so advanced. How can we possibly fight them?" Smiled grimly. "The same way the Afghans fought the Soviets and the same way they fought us. You don't need fancy weapons to kill an enemy. You just need determination, knowledge of the terrain, and the willingness to take risks." The alien ground forces had expected to find cowering humans hiding in their homes, ready to surrender at the first sign of superior firepower. Instead, they encountered carefully prepared ambushes, improvised explosive devices, and sniper fire from concealed positions. Every human they killed seemed to be replaced by two more who fought even harder. In the suburbs of Detroit, a neighborhood watch group had transformed their community into a fortress. Led by Maria Santos, a former Marine sergeant who had served in the Pacific conflicts, the residents had barricaded streets, set up observation posts, and established fields of fire that would make any advancing enemy pay dearly for progress. "These aliens don't understand what they're dealing with," Maria explained to her neighbors as they prepared their defenses. "They see individual humans as weak and fragile. They don't understand that we're strongest when we work together." The neighborhood had become a small army overnight. Accountants carried hunting rifles, teachers built explosive devices from household chemicals, and teenagers served as scouts and messengers. Everyone had a role to play in the defense of their community. Mrs., an elderly woman who had lived through the communist takeover of her homeland decades earlier, worked alongside teenage boys to prepare ammunition. "I've seen what happens when good people do nothing," she said quietly. "These aliens chose the wrong planet to invade." As night fell on the first day of the invasion, the alien commanders were puzzled by the reports from their ground forces. They had expected organized military resistance from major population centers, which they had successfully neutralized. What they hadn't anticipated was the decentralized, grassroots resistance that seemed to emerge from every corner of the planet. Human beings were fighting back with a ferocity that their technological disadvantage. Farmers used agricultural equipment as weapons, construction workers turned their tools into instruments of war, and ordinary citizens displayed a level of courage and determination that the aliens couldn't comprehend. In a command bunker beneath the ruins of NORAD, General Stone maintained communication with resistance cells across North America. The military's formal command structure had been severely damaged, but an informal network of fighters had emerged to take its place. Veterans, law enforcement officers, hunters, and ordinary citizens were all contributing to a growing resistance movement. "Reports coming in from all sectors," her aide informed her. "The aliens control the major cities and transportation hubs, but they're facing heavy resistance in rural areas and suburbs. Casualty reports are significant on both sides." General Stone nodded. She had seen the reports of alien forces taking heavy losses in places they had expected no resistance. Human fighters were using their knowledge of local terrain, their experience with improvised tactics, and their sheer stubborn refusal to give up to level the playing field. "What's the status on our special operations teams?" she asked. "Still operational, ma'am. They're coordinating with local resistance groups and providing training and equipment where possible." The general allowed herself a small smile. The aliens might have superior technology, but they were learning that warfare wasn't just about having the biggest guns. It was about understanding your enemy, and they clearly didn't understand humanity at all. As the first day of the invasion ended, the aliens found themselves in control of much of Earth's infrastructure, but facing a human population that showed no signs of surrender. Every attempt to establish permanent outposts was met with harassment attacks, sabotage, and determined resistance from humans who refused to accept defeat. The battle for Earth had only just begun, and humanity was proving to be a far more formidable opponent than the aliens had ever imagined. 3 weeks had passed since the initial invasion, and the aliens were beginning to understand that they had severely miscalculated their opponents. What was supposed to be a quick subjugation campaign had turned into a grinding war of attrition that was bleeding their forces dry. Every day brought new reports of ambushed patrols, destroyed supply convoys, and sabotaged installations. Commander stood before the tactical display in his flagship's command center, studying the bewildering pattern of human resistance across the planet's surface. His species, the hegemony, had conquered 47 worlds in the past century, and every previous campaign had followed the same predictable pattern. Destroy the primitive military infrastructure, demonstrate overwhelming superiority, and accept the inevitable surrender from the defeated species. Earth should have been no different. The commander's compound eyes focused on the red markers indicating active resistance cells. They were everywhere, scattered across every continent like some kind of planetary infection. His tactical officers had initially dismissed these groups as minor irritants that would collapse once the organized military forces were eliminated. Now, those same officers were requesting reinforcements to deal with human fighters who seemed to multiply like parasites. "Status report," clicked in his species' complex language. Subcommander, his intelligence officer, approached with obvious reluctance. "Commander, our losses continue to mount. We have lost 17% of our ground forces, and the humans show no signs of weakening. If anything, their resistance appears to be intensifying." His mandibles clacked in frustration. How is this possible? Our preliminary scans showed a fragmented species with no unified command structure. They should have collapsed into chaos within days. "That is part of the problem, Commander. Their lack of centralized command makes them incredibly difficult to defeat decisively. We destroy one group, and 3 more appear elsewhere. We eliminate their leaders, and new ones emerge from their civilian population. In the mountains of Afghanistan, Captain was demonstrating exactly what the alien intelligence officer meant. The former Afghan army officer had survived decades of conflict, first as a Mujahideen fighter against the Soviets, then as a government soldier against the Taliban, and finally as a resistance leader against various occupying forces. To him, the alien invasion was just another chapter in his country's long history of resisting foreign invaders. "These aliens fight like the Russians," he explained to a mixed group of Afghan fighters and stranded American soldiers who had joined his resistance cell. "They rely on superior firepower and advanced technology, but they don't understand the land or the people." Staff Sergeant Mike, a U.S. Army veteran who had been caught in Afghanistan when the invasion began, nodded in agreement. "In all my tour here, the most effective fighters were always the locals who knew every rock and ravine. These aliens might have energy weapons, but they're fighting blind." This group had perfected tactics that maximized their knowledge of the terrain while minimizing their exposure to alien firepower. They used the cave systems that had sheltered fighters for generations, struck quickly at alien patrols, and disappeared before the invaders could bring their superior weapons to bear. "My grandfather fought the British," continued. "My father fought the Soviets, and I have fought Americans, Taliban, and now aliens. The weapons change, but the principles remain the same. You make the enemy pay for every step, you never give them rest, and eventually they decide that holding your land costs more than it's worth." Meanwhile, in the industrial cities of Germany, a different kind of resistance was taking shape. A former colonel who had served in multiple NATO peacekeeping missions had organized the workers of the Ruhr Valley into a highly effective guerrilla force. The industrial infrastructure that the aliens wanted to capture intact was being systematically destroyed by the very people who had built and maintained it. "They want our factories, our power plants, our transportation networks," addressed a gathering of steelworkers, engineers, and technicians in an abandoned subway tunnel. "Without these facilities, their occupation becomes much more difficult. We may not be able to drive them off immediately, but we can make sure they don't benefit from conquering us." The German resistance had developed a particularly effective strategy of industrial sabotage. Power plant operators caused cascading failures in electrical grids, factory workers introduced subtle defects into manufacturing equipment, and transportation workers ensured that nothing moved efficiently under alien control. The invaders found themselves ruling over a planet whose infrastructure was crumbling faster than they could repair it. Back in North America, the resistance movement had evolved from scattered survival groups into a sophisticated network of fighters, scouts, and support personnel. Communication between cells was maintained through an ingenious system of ham radio operators, motorcycle couriers, and even trained pigeons in some areas where electronic communication was too dangerous. Sarah Martinez had become one of those couriers, using her knowledge of farm roads and back trails to carry messages between resistance groups across Kansas and Oklahoma. Her grandfather's old farm had been transformed into a major supply depot, with the barn hiding stockpiled weapons and ammunition gathered from abandoned military bases and civilian sources. "Package delivery," she announced as she arrived at a resistance camp hidden in an abandoned grain silo, dismounting from her dirt bike and removing a waterproof bag from her backpack. The camp leader, a former National Guard sergeant named Tony, took the package and checked the encrypted contents. Intelligence reports, ammunition requests, and tactical updates from other resistance cells across the region. The informal communication network had become more reliable than anything the aliens had managed to establish on the captured planet. "Tell your grandfather that the Detroit group successfully hit another alien supply depot yesterday," Tony said as he prepared his reply message. "They're having trouble keeping their equipment operational without access to our manufacturing base." Sarah nodded and prepared for the return journey. These intelligence networks had revealed something important about their alien enemies. Despite their advanced technology, the invaders were heavily dependent on complex supply chains and manufacturing facilities. Disrupting these systems was having a significant impact on their ability to maintain their occupation force. In the Pacific Northwest, a group of environmental activists led by Dr. Rachel had discovered another alien vulnerability. The invaders' technology seemed to rely heavily on rare earth minerals, and several of their most important installations had been built near mining sites. Rachel's background in environmental science and her experience with direct action protests had proven invaluable in developing new forms of resistance. "These aliens are strip mining our planet," she explained to a group of former park rangers, environmental scientists, and outdoor enthusiasts gathered in an old-growth forest. "They're extracting materials for their technology, but they're doing it with the same arrogance they showed when they invaded. They don't understand the ecosystems they're disrupting." The environmental resistance had developed tactics that used the aliens' own mining operations against them, contaminating extracted materials with local bacteria that corroded alien metals, introducing invasive plant species that interfered with their equipment, and even training local wildlife to avoid or harass alien installations. The invaders found their carefully planned extraction operations constantly plagued by mysterious equipment failures and biological contamination. Doctor's most successful operation had involved introducing a modified algae into the water supply at a major alien processing facility. The algae thrived in the specific conditions created by alien technology, rapidly multiplying and clogging filtration systems throughout the complex. The facility was forced to shut down for weeks while the aliens tried to understand and counter this biological attack. "They understand engineering," Doctor observed, "but they don't understand ecology. They see individual components rather than interconnected systems. That's why they didn't realize that attacking Earth would trigger a response from the entire planet, not just human military forces." As autumn progressed, the alien occupation forces found themselves dealing with increasingly sophisticated resistance operations. Human fighters had learned to coordinate their attacks, targeting multiple installations simultaneously to prevent the aliens from concentrating their defenses. The invaders were forced to spread their forces thin across vast areas, making them vulnerable to the same kind of asymmetric warfare that had frustrated conventional armies for centuries. In urban areas that remained under alien control, civilian resistance took different forms. Dr. James Wright, a computer scientist from Silicon Valley, had organized a network of hackers and engineers who specialized in electronic warfare against alien systems. Working from hidden bunkers in the San Francisco Bay Area, they had learned to disrupt alien communication networks and even hijack some of their automated systems. "Their technology is advanced, but it follows logical principles," James explained to his team of programmers and electronics experts. "Once you understand the underlying architecture, you can find ways to exploit it. They're not dealing with magic, they're dealing with very sophisticated engineering." The cyber resistance had achieved several significant victories, including temporarily taking control of an alien transport vehicle and using it to gather intelligence on enemy installations. More importantly, they had learned to create interference that disrupted alien coordination during human attacks, making resistance operations significantly more effective. The aliens' response to the growing resistance was predictably brutal. They began targeting civilian populations in areas where resistance activity was particularly strong, hoping to break human morale through terror. This strategy backfired spectacularly, as it only strengthened human resolve and brought new recruits into the resistance movement. In the ruins of Atlanta, former police detective Murphy had witnessed an alien reprisal attack that killed dozens of innocent civilians. Instead of breaking her will to fight, the massacre had transformed her into one of the most effective resistance leaders in the Southeast. Her background in law enforcement had taught her to think like a criminal investigator, skills that proved invaluable in planning operations against the occupying forces. "These aliens don't understand justice," she told a gathering of survivors in an abandoned shopping mall. "They think they can terrorize us into submission by killing innocent people. All they've done is show us exactly why we need to fight them." Group specialized in rescue operations, extracting human prisoners from alien detention facilities, and gathering intelligence on enemy activities. Her law enforcement background had taught her patience and methodical planning, qualities that made her operations remarkably successful. The aliens found their detention centers repeatedly breached by humans who seemed to anticipate their security measures. As winter approached, the alien commanders were forced to acknowledge that their conquest of Earth was not proceeding according to plan. What should have been a routine occupation had become a costly war of attrition that was depleting their resources and threatening their overall strategic position in the galaxy. Commander reviewed the latest casualty reports with growing alarm. His invasion force had been reduced by nearly 40%, and replacement troops were still months away. The humans continued to fight with a determination that all logic, refusing to surrender even when faced with impossible odds. "Perhaps we should consider negotiating with the human leadership," suggested Subcommander. "Their resistance is proving more costly than anticipated." His compound eyes fixed on his subordinate with barely contained fury. "The hegemony does not negotiate with primitive species. We will simply have to adjust our tactics to deal with their unexpected resilience." But privately, the alien commander was beginning to wonder if they had bitten off more than they could chew. The humans were proving to be unlike any species they had previously encountered, displaying a level of adaptability and determination that challenged everything the hegemony thought they knew about warfare and conquest. On Earth, the human resistance continued to grow stronger each day, learning from their experiences and developing new tactics to counter alien advantages. The battle for humanity's survival was far from over, but the aliens were beginning to realize that conquering Earth would require a far greater effort than they had ever imagined. 6 months after the initial invasion, the conflict had evolved into something no military strategist on either side had anticipated. The alien occupation force controlled most major cities and transportation hubs, but their authority extended barely beyond the range of their weapons. The countryside remained a patchwork of human-controlled territories connected by an underground network that had grown more sophisticated with each passing week. Commander stood in the ruins of what had once been the United Nations building in New York, now serving as the aliens' primary command center on Earth. Through the shattered windows, he could see smoke rising from at least 3 different points in the city where resistance operations were. The humans had not only refused to surrender, they had actually grown bolder and more coordinated as the occupation dragged on. "Commander," his communications officer reported, "we have lost contact with Outpost 7 in the Colorado sector. Long-range sensors indicate the facility has been completely destroyed." His mandibles clicked in frustration. That was the 4th major installation lost this month, and each attack had been more sophisticated than the last. The humans were learning, adapting, and evolving their tactics faster than his forces could counter them. Intelligence reports suggested they were now coordinating operations across vast distances, turning isolated resistance cells into components of a planet-wide insurgency. In a hidden bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, General Stone reviewed the latest operational reports with a satisfaction she hadn't felt since the early days of the war. The resistance network she had helped establish was now effectively functioning as humanity's shadow government, coordinating military operations, distributing resources, and maintaining communication across the embattled planet. "Ma'am, Operation Lightning Strike was a complete success," reported Colonel Hayes, who had transformed from an Air Force pilot into one of the most effective ground commanders in the resistance. "We hit 15 alien installations simultaneously across 4 time zones. They're completely off balance." General Stone studied the tactical display showing the locations of recent attacks. The pattern was beautiful in its complexity, a coordinated campaign that would have been impressive for a conventional military force, let alone a guerrilla movement operating without centralized command structure. The human resistance had developed something the aliens couldn't counter: true distributed leadership. "What's our casualty count?" she asked. "Remarkably light. The aliens are becoming predictable in their responses. They're still fighting like they're dealing with a conventional enemy instead of an insurgency." The key to humanity's growing success lay in lessons learned from generations of asymmetric warfare. Veterans from conflicts in Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, and countless other campaigns had brought their hard-won knowledge to the resistance. But more importantly, ordinary civilians had proven remarkably adaptable to guerrilla tactics, displaying a natural talent for the kind of unconventional thinking that frustrated conventional military forces. In the former industrial heartland of Michigan, Maria Santos had transformed her neighborhood watch group into a model for urban resistance. The suburban community had become a fortress in all but name, with every house connected by underground tunnels, every street corner equipped with hidden observation posts, and every resident trained in basic combat and communications procedures. "The aliens control the highways and the airports," Maria explained to a visiting resistance coordinator, "but they can't control the neighborhoods. We know every backyard, every basement, every shortcut. When they come through here, they're not fighting on familiar ground anymore. The transformation of American suburbs into resistant strongholds had caught the aliens completely off guard. They had expected to find cowering civilians hiding in their homes. Instead, they encountered coordinated networks of fighters who had turned residential areas into elaborate defensive positions. Swimming pools became weapons caches, garden sheds housed communication equipment, and children's playgrounds were converted into training facilities. Mrs., the elderly woman who had survived previous occupations, had become something of a legend among the local resistance. Despite her age, she had proven remarkably skilled at creating improvised explosives using household chemicals and materials. Her quiet demeanor and grandmother appearance allowed her to move freely through alien-controlled areas, gathering intelligence and placing demolition charges with devastating effectiveness. "These aliens think they understand humans," she observed while teaching a group of teenagers how to construct remote detonators. "They see only what's on the surface. They don't understand that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one who doesn't look dangerous at all." The success of the suburban resistance had inspired similar efforts in rural areas, where farmers and ranchers proved equally adept at unconventional warfare. The aliens had assumed that agricultural regions would be easily controlled due to their sparse population and limited infrastructure. Instead, they found themselves dealing with opponents who knew every trail, every hiding place, and every potential ambush site across vast territories. In Kansas, Sarah Martinez had evolved from a message courier into a regional coordinator, overseeing resistance activities across 3 states. Her grandfather's farm had become a major training center where urban refugees learned rural survival skills while teaching advanced technical knowledge to agricultural communities. The combination of traditional farming wisdom and modern technological expertise had proven remarkably effective against alien forces. "The key is thinking like your enemy," Grandpa Joe explained to a group of new recruits practicing camouflage techniques. "These aliens are used to fighting on open battlefields against conventional armies. They don't know how to deal with an enemy that can disappear into the landscape and emerge anywhere." The old veteran's insights had proven prophetic. Human resistance fighters had mastered the art of blending into their environment, whether urban or rural, using local knowledge and community support to remain invisible until they chose to strike. The aliens found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, never knowing when or where the next attack would come. International coordination had emerged organically as resistance cells made contact across national borders. Language barriers had initially posed challenges, but the shared experience of occupation and resistance had created bonds that transcended cultural differences. A resistance leader in Germany found more in common with a fighter in Japan than either might have had with their former governments. In what remained of the European resistance networks, had established contact with similar groups across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The industrial sabotage techniques developed in the Ruhr Valley had been adapted to different environments and manufacturing processes, creating a global campaign of economic warfare against the occupation forces. "They came here thinking they could use our own infrastructure against us," reported during a clandestine video conference with resistance leaders from around the world. "Instead, we have turned that infrastructure into a weapon against them. Every factory they try to operate experiences mysterious breakdowns. Every power plant they control suffers cascading failures." The aliens had grown increasingly frustrated with their inability to effectively utilize Earth's industrial capacity. Equipment that should have been producing supplies for their occupation forces instead broke down regularly, produced defective materials, or suffered contamination that rendered the output useless. Human workers forced to operate under alien supervision had developed countless subtle ways to sabotage production without triggering immediate retaliation. Dr. Rachel's environmental resistance had evolved into a sophisticated biological warfare campaign. Working with scientists from multiple disciplines, they had learned to weaponize Earth's own ecosystem against the alien invaders. Bacterial agents designed to corrode alien materials, modified plants that interfered with their technology, and even trained animals that could penetrate enemy installations had all become part of humanity's arsenal. "Evolution is on our side," Doctor explained during a briefing to other resistance scientists. "These aliens are adapted to their home environment, not ours. Every day they spend on Earth, our planet is working to break down their technology and weaken their forces." The biological approach had achieved remarkable successes, including the development of airborne bacteria that could penetrate alien filtration systems and contaminate their life support equipment. Several alien installations had been abandoned after becoming uninhabitable due to what the Resistance termed aggressive ecological adjustment. Urban warfare had taken on new dimensions as human fighters learned to use the aliens' own technology against them. The cyber resistance led by Dr. James Wright had successfully reverse-engineered several alien systems, enabling human forces to hijack enemy vehicles, disrupt communication networks, and even turn alien automated defenses against their creators. Their security is sophisticated but rigid, James reported during one of his regular updates to Resistance leadership. Once you understand the protocols, you can exploit them. They never expected their own technology to be used against them by a supposedly primitive species. The cyber warfare campaign had achieved its most spectacular success when Resistance hackers managed to take temporary control of an alien command ship, using its own weapons to attack other alien installations before the override was discovered and corrected. The psychological impact on enemy forces had been enormous, demonstrating that even their most advanced technology was vulnerable to human ingenuity. As the first anniversary of the invasion approached, the strategic situation had fundamentally shifted. The aliens still possessed superior firepower and technology, but they were fighting a war they didn't understand against an enemy they had completely underestimated. Every tactical victory came at an increasing cost, and their supply lines stretched back to distant star systems were becoming unsustainable. Commander faced a decision that would have been unthinkable when the invasion began. His forces controlled less territory than when they started, suffered daily casualties that could not be easily replaced, and faced an enemy that grew stronger with each passing month. The humans had transformed from a conquest target into a strategic threat that challenged the very foundations of military doctrine. Commander, Subcommander approached with obvious reluctance. The Hegemony High Command is demanding a status report. They want to know when Earth will be fully and ready for colonial development. Considered his response carefully. Admitting failure was not an option in culture, but continuing the current campaign would likely result in the complete destruction of his invasion force. The humans had demonstrated abilities that challenged everything the hegemony thought they knew about primitive species. Prepare a report recommending strategic withdrawal, he finally ordered. Classify Earth as a Category 7 threat requiring specialized pacification protocols. This designation would effectively remove Earth from the hegemony's immediate expansion plans while preserving its reputation. More importantly, it would give the humans time to continue developing their defensive capabilities, while the aliens reconsidered their approach to this unexpectedly dangerous species. On Earth, the Resistance leadership had begun planning for the long-term implications of their success. General Stone understood that driving off the current invasion force was only the first step in a larger conflict. Humanity needed to prepare for the possibility of future alien attacks while using the captured technology to advance their own capabilities. We've proven that humans can fight and win against technologically superior enemies, she addressed a gathering of Resistance leaders from around the world. Now we need to prove that we can build a better future from the ashes of this war. The general's words reflected a growing understanding among the Resistance that their struggle had changed humanity itself. The shared experience of fighting for survival had created bonds across national, cultural, and ethnic lines that might never have existed otherwise. More importantly, the necessity of rapid adaptation and innovation had accelerated human technological development in ways that would have taken decades under normal circumstances. As alien forces began their gradual withdrawal from Earth's surface, human communities emerged from hiding to reclaim their planet. The scars of invasion were everywhere, but so were signs of human resilience and ingenuity. Cities would be rebuilt, infrastructure would be restored, and life would continue. But humanity would never again be the same species that had looked up at strange ships in the morning sky. They had faced annihilation and fought back with a determination that impressed even their enemies. They had proven to themselves and to the galaxy that Earth's inhabitants were not merely another primitive species to be conquered and exploited. The message would spread through the galaxy's communication networks. Humanity fights back. Any species considering Earth as a target for conquest would need to carefully consider whether the potential rewards were worth the certain cost. The humans had made it clear that they would not go quietly into the night, no matter what technological advantages their enemies might possess. In the end, the aliens had fallen from Earth's skis not because of superior human technology or overwhelming firepower, but because they had failed to understand the most fundamental aspect of human nature. When threatened with extinction, humans don't surrender. They adapt, they learn, and they fight back with everything they have. The battle-hardened humans had indeed stood firm, and in doing so, they had secured not just their survival, but their place as a force to be reckoned with in a galaxy that would never again underestimate the species from the small blue planet.